Of course, does everybody here a little bit versed on DJ technology, 2 turntables and a mixer, or do I have to take a really big step backwards here? Well, quickly, basic DJ setup that was in any club back then from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, of course, is your mixer and your 2 turntables. The mixer being something which enables you to mix the 2 records together. What everybody else was doing at that time was just playing a record and then crossfading and mixing into another record. Some people were able to align the beats together, which made them sound very, flawless, and it was hard to tell when things were coming in and out. But that was about it. In Detroit, I started going, down to the Shelter, listening to Derek play, and he would do all these crazy things, what was called EQing, which at that time an EQ was a way to make your sound better by, if your EQ works, by taking certain frequencies out or by accentuating the frequencies, you could in effect change the records. Again, at this time, most club owners, most parties you went to, the EQ was back here, locked behind some grating. I remember actually at the Shelter sometimes we'd try and take screwdrivers out so we could actually play with it. But luckily, some bright engineer started to release mixers with more intricate EQs on them, and this is what Derek was using. So he'd be playing a record and taking all these things out, and he'd start using, say, the very, very high parts of one record and the very low parts of another record. So when it came together, it was this new third record that didn't exist, but it was much more than just 2 records on top of each other. He was starting to pick the frequencies, the parts that kind of went together and complemented each other. And I don't know if that came from him being a producer or just thinking differently, but that was, as simple as it sounds, that really wasn't happening anywhere else, And I started to, notice this as I started to travel more. And around 1990, I started with my partner John Acquaviva, a record label called Plus 8. And shortly afterwards, we had an underground hit, whatever that means, but with Dan Bell and John and I under the name Cybersonic. And suddenly, people wanted a DJ to go over and play this record overseas. They wanted someone from the Plus 8 camp to, kind of play their Detroit, Windsor sound, whatever it was we were doing. And so I went over there. I went over to London, and the first thing I noticed was what I'm talking about now, is that no one was EQing. No one was doing anything different. It was just, everyone was into acid house, everyone was into Detroit techno, but it was nearly like playing by numbers. Here's one record, here's another record, here's another. And it was, for someone coming from Detroit at that time, growing up, going to the Music Institute, and, in a dark room, and hearing just these walls of sound and high frequencies coming out, low frequencies, and these records that I knew, off by heart by then, getting morphed into something completely different. Going to London was a little bit of an eye-opener. It was like, man, you guys need to wake up. These guys were, really into techno, really into acid house, but it was like they were nearly, I'm not dissing anyone over there, well, I guess I am, but a lot of the people, it was just like they were regular DJs who had come up through the 70s and 80s playing soul music, which a lot of them were, just playing them back. Not really, there was nothing really progressive about the way they were playing their music. And I think, that's what I got from Derek and those guys, and that kind of point is what's carried on throughout my career. That electronic music, when I heard Derek's records, when I heard Kevin's Wands, all these guys, it was futuristic music. It was alien music. There was no way, every time you tried to classify it, it kind of moved ahead again. And as much as the music was like that, I find, when I look back, the mentality of the DJs in every aspect was also that in Detroit. It wasn't, if you're making futuristic music, you have to you have to perform futuristically. And that's, kind of what I guess I've been trying to do for the last 10 years. Find new ways of performing, whether it's a live performance or whether it's a DJ's performance. Find new technologies, old technologies, or wrong technologies to do something different, and to mark the nights that I play as something really significant and special, kind of like the nights that I remember in my head from the early days in Detroit, or not just Detroit, because I've had great experiences throughout all over the world now. But those first points in Detroit, hearing again Derek and those guys play, when they were doing these crazy things, it was like, well, they were doing something unlike anybody else, and those are things I'm going to remember for the rest of my life, because they were doing something different. And that's kind of, I think, what the whole mentality of Detroit and Detroit techno has always been for me. So anyway, when I was over in England doing, doing these gigs and DJing and stuff like that, I remember this one show, which I don't know if I'll use my quote, which Derek wants me to use, but I was at, I started to notice how much an impact you could have by changing these records. I was playing at a club called Saber Sonic, and I was just doing what I normally do around here, and playing two records, dropping the bass out, creating tension, creating anticipation, and suddenly this crowd was just started going completely off, much like the crowds were going off here back then. But the promoter came up to me, and people started coming up to me and said, "What the hell are you doing?" Thought I was crazy. I was, doing all this stuff with the EQ, and suddenly there was just and everyone's like, "Well, where'd the record go?" But suddenly the crowd was going absolutely ballistic when it kicked back in. Like, it was just an incredible energy rush. And so it was just really easy to, apparent for me to see that this was the way forward for performance and for DJing and for my career. Shortly after that, I started to also delve into live shows under the name Plastic Man. This is 92, 93. And that was a whole new ball of wax. What that entailed was, forget all this, the DJing equipment. It was like taking my whole studio out on the road. In a lot of ways, it was the biggest pain in my ass. Carrying all, people probably see now, the laptop technicians. They take their laptop around, and that's all they need. But back then, there was no such thing as Reason or any of these programs that you can do all these sounds on. And it was me by myself with probably, 2 or 3 of these huge crates, carrying them around, sending them over to London, doing all these sound checks and stuff. And once everything was going, the potential that I had for the crowd was unbelievable, because I had all these special effects, all these things that I had in my studio to do trickery with, new ways to play one of my songs, like Spastic or one of the early Fuse records, but play it in a different way again. And again, I just started seeing people recognize what I was doing, and then suddenly say, well, this isn't exactly like the album version. This isn't exactly like I heard someone else play it. And just saw, that kind of, it's kind of like pulling the rug out from people's feet a little bit, giving them something that they know, giving them something which is comfortable, but then kind of twisting it a little bit. And that got me to thinking, well, is there a way that I could have this potential without taking all this stuff around? I was a little bit lazy too, I think. So, but would there be a way of kind of combining the potential of the live show, the equipment of the live show, but have the opportunity to play other people's music with records, and kind of cross this idea of DJing and live performance? And that's kind of where the very, very, very first beginnings of what I guess I refer to now as Dex FX 909 came about. And I did a number of experiments. Maybe some of you guys were there in kind of the early days of 93, 94, around Detroit, around Toronto. You'd see, if you came to any of the parties, it was a really strange setup. We had, there was no actual technology to do what I wanted to do at that point for DJing. There wasn't any of these fancy mixers with all these, lots of, knobs that do crazy things. So I actually had to use 2 mixers. So you had something here to play the records. I had this other big thing up here. You usually couldn't really see me because I was hidden behind all this stuff. And somehow, plugging all this stuff in kind of back to front, I was able to kind of combine that idea of the live performance and the DJ performance. And when I started doing this, the results were instantaneous. I was able to play, any of these records that people knew, and suddenly completely mutate them beyond what I was able to do with this EQ. Because of that, by that time, other people had started to use the EQ. It had become commonplace. And I guess that's another thing that drives me forward and along. With technology, as it moves forward, there's always other people trying similar things. And once everybody else is trying it, I'm usually trying to find something new, a new angle. Because again, doing these things is what distinguishes me from the rest of the guys or the rest of the girls, whoever's out there performing. And so I was always looking for that new angle, and using these new boxes and things, the next thing I kind of added to the EQ was using an effects box. And what that does is it gives me a number of different possibilities to change the record again, to mutate it, to add or subtract different frequencies. And I'm gonna keep playing this record, so by the end you'll probably get really bored of it, but it's the best way to demonstrate the differences. So again, we had all the EQ tricks. By '93, this was kind of played out, and everyone was doing it. And actually, by that time, a lot of the equipment manufacturers had also caught up and had started releasing mixers with EQs built into them, because pre-1990, a lot of them didn't. And if they did, still the club owners were like putting a lock and key under it. So the next thing I added was an effects box, which doesn't really, they all look differently, but this is what's here. So if anyone's seen me play recently, I usually have some kind of crate full of gizmos, and this is one of the ones I'm using right now. And this enables me, the effect I have right now is a delay, so I can start to play with things a little bit more. I usually do it a little bit better when I'm like, trying to make people dance. Everything's syncopated, but I'm not worrying about it so much today. So I can do it. If you need me to prove it, come to the next party. One of the kind of the problems I started having when I started using all this equipment, especially when I had this other mixing board up here, was that I found out I only had two hands, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to do all these things and do them in time to for the crowd's reaction. And so my kind of, I'm going to hold this up. My secret weapon became this, which is like an old guitar pedal, which actually, in a lot of ways, Decks and Effects 909 wouldn't have been able to even happen without this, because this is kind of my third hand, and this enables me to change some of the effects parameters. So if I'm taking frequencies out of a record, if I'm doing special EQ routines, if I'm doing these delays, this changes a certain parameter so that I can have my hands free to, well, mix. I don't scratch, but so you can hear it change. So that was another kind of looking for new technology and old technology that could enable me to do something interesting. One of the things I had to look for is even the effects box that I was using in the early days, not all of them can be controlled this way. So it was always a thing of trying to find the right box to do the right thing, and which would also give me the most power without bringing in a whole box load of equipment. So. One of the next kind of developments, which actually we didn't even bring it today, and I just noticed that, but was another crossover from what I was doing in my live performances, and that was trying to add a little bit more spontaneity into my shows. And some of you may have seen, for a while I was using a TR-909 drum machine in my shows, and what that enabled me to do was not only play people's records and not only mutate them with these effects, but to also add in new production or new percussion over top. Again, just to change the records. And not only was, it wasn't just the technology or the other people who were doing some of the things that were driving me forward. It was, as this scene has got bigger and bigger, when I started out, 10 years ago, if I had this particular record, perhaps I was one of the only ones in Detroit with it, or maybe there was like 2 or 3. And if people were going out every night, maybe they only heard it once or twice a month. And as this whole scene has got bigger and bigger, more commercial or more popular, people have been hearing the records more often. You can go to the store now and buy the best of, house, or the best of techno, or a Jeff Mills mix CD or my mix CD, and hear some of your favorite records. And you nearly become, you nearly know the records too well. So if everyone's listening to all the stuff that all the DJs playing, I started to think, well, then it's getting, again, it's making my job harder, because I'm up there playing these records back. People have got these at CDs. They're listening to them at home. There's got to be another way, or I've got to search for more possibilities to allow me to change these records again. It's nearly like I'm on a quest for being able to play, someone's favorite record that they've heard for 20 or 30 times to them again for the first time. So they're like, oh, I know this record. I love this record, but I've never heard this version before. Or, what has he done to it? Just again, to pull that rug out from beneath the feet, to make things a little bit uncomfortable, because, some of the, I guess we go to these clubs and we want to dance, or we're listening to this music at home, but if it's just a run-of-the-mill night and someone plays all this favorite music back and forth, it just gets, again, it isn't memorable. There's got to be something which is uncomfortable, or something which is, what is this? What is he playing? What is he doing? Is this a remix? Is this a special re-edit, or, is this a brand new track? And it kind of like starting to pose questions to people. So, again, they're thinking about it. So that's always kind of been in the back of my mind to, in this quest for what equipment to use and why I'm doing it. It's just another reason to mark that evening for the people, for the person to really identify kind of a moment in time, so that hopefully in 10 years, people who've been to my shows will either look back and have those as the things that they thought were important enough to lock away in their memories. Okay, I'm going to look at my notes because I'm getting a bit sidetracked. One of the other, as I started to use some of these technologies, the effects and everything else, it started to also help me start to think about music in a slightly different way. Taking another little step back, when I began, it was this basic EQing technique, and it was about playing 2 records on top of each other. Then I added the effects and further instrumentation of the 909, and it started to become more like remixing the records that I was playing. And when you start to think that way, I started to listen to the records not in a linear fashion, which is a way I think a lot of other DJs were thinking of music at that time, just playing back the record the way it was recorded. I even have some friends who are, like DJs just to play back the record the way it was made. This is the way the producer made the record, just play it back and then play the next record. But I didn't think that was right. I thought that there must be a way to, interact with these records to create something new. That's what a DJ does, overlays 2 records to create something new. And, you know, that's what these technologies are also enabling me to do, but in a greater way. And the more I did this, the more I started to think about these records I was playing more as just kind of samples and bits and pieces, small little loops, just things that I was kind of sequencing together for 1 hour or 4 hours or 8 hours at a club or in my studio. And so I started to experiment a little bit with these ideas in the studio and also out using these effects and everything. And kind of where that led me to, which was probably around 97, 98, was taking a record that had been quite a large hit and trying to reevaluate that record by re-looping and resampling and all this. And the record I chose was this record, Yellow, Oh Yeah, which of course was a big hit. I had been playing it in my DJ sets towards the end of the night. I was using these effects and everything to change it, you know. I was seeing the reaction of the people, you know, how kind of startled they were when they first heard this Oh Yeah track coming in, and then hearing it kind of get reevaluated in a live situation. So I took that into the studio and created this track Minus Orange. And while in there, while manipulating all these different loops and things, I started to get a further idea of where I wanted to go. I guess records and tracks started to become nearly smaller and smaller. I started to think in this kind of, as everything is components. And that's the next thing after Minus Orange was the first DE9 record, the Dex Effects 909 Volume 1. And what that CD wanted to capture was kind of my live performance at that time with the Dex Effects, the 909, overlaying records, trying to play these records differently than anybody else had, and just give things a new twist, I guess. And you know, I guess it was successful in capturing what I was doing live, but I wasn't as happy as I wanted to be when it was done. I thought it was still, the records, it was still too linear. It was still, you could still see too much of the remnants of the tracks how they were originally. You know, when the part that Jeff Mills' part came in, it was still basically his track. It was slightly reworked, but it really wasn't, it hadn't been changed too much. And that's when I started to really kind of delve into some other technologies. Some of them have changed now. I've got some different ones up here to try and get beyond this linear approach and to get closer, well, which ended up being the title of the record, get closer into the edit, closer into the music I was playing and have even more potential. Get beyond just overlaying effects on top of records, but get into the records themselves. And one of the components I used, well, this isn't exactly the same component, but I started to experiment with samplers. If you want to get this. And around this time there was a lot of computer technology coming out, programs like Acid and Recycle, if anyone's aware of these programs. But there's kind of a technology turn to getting into records closer, really just sampling things and re-looping them and kind of deconstructing the music that we're listening to. So this little box here, same record. This box enables me to start to rework with the records and take smaller components out and really have more potential of, I guess, remixing or again, pulling that rug out of people's feet. Everyone's expecting a break to come in. Everyone's expecting the hi-hats to go out. Everyone's expecting the bass line to come in, and I can just take that record away and make that passage longer, or just use that to mix into another record, or take another sample from another record and overlay that. So it's really starting to change the structure, because I think people, it's not only are people when they're at clubs listening to, the acid lines or all this, but people get very aware of the structure of songs. So even if they don't recognize a song, they kind of remember when a certain part comes in. So this enabled me to really kind of change that and again create some type of tension or some type of anticipation, waiting for the event that possibly wasn't going to happen. Sorry. And that, using this technology out live, really started to get me interested in, how the idea, how the whole realm of DJing was going to develop even more. Was it going to be possible to get away from, just playing these linear records? And at this point, I was getting a little bit tired. I was getting tired of carrying 200 records with me. I was getting tired of even the equipment I was taking with the Dex FX 909 tour. I was at a point where I could only deconstruct the record so much. There needed to be some type of new way to play music back. And that's kind of when I started hearing some rumors, and some kind of web pages talking about early Final Scratch technology. And this has been around in various stages of development, about 3 or 4 years. Final Scratch, which I'm going to explain a little bit more in a minute, was developed by 2 hackers, actually one main hacker in Amsterdam, at an MP3 convention. And it was kind of one of those silly things where some guy was DJing and playing back MP3s, and just off of a computer, and this guy was like, "Oh, that's a stupid way to do it. There's got to be a better way to control." And someone said, "Well, why don't you just use a record to control an MP3?" And everyone was like, "Well, you can't do that." And of course, you say that to a hacker, then he's going to do it, right? So about 6 months later, he had a very rough prototype, which my partner John Acquaviva got to see. And I saw the later prototype, which did what it does now, which I'm going to show you. But there was a huge delay. So you were able to control MP3 files off of a record. But if I did a movement, about 6 or 7 or maybe 8 seconds later, something happened on the computer, and you're like, "Wow, that's cool. I'm not going to use that. Forget it." Actually, John isn't as into technology as myself, and he was totally blown away. He ordered a system and everything. He was like, "I'm going to use it. No, give me one." And it's still at his house on the floor, and you can never get it working. But he does. He has the newer version now, and he is using it. But over the development, John and I kept in touch with these guys, and we're just, for a number of different reasons, just got really excited about it, about the idea of carrying a lot more music with you in a computer than was possible with normal vinyl. But what really started interesting me was that perhaps this was the technology I was looking for. Perhaps this was going to allow me to play back music again differently than everyone else, to perhaps, change music, re-edit music, and generally have more potential to fuck with music than I'd ever had before. It was finally not a perfect nonlinear approach, but one step in the right direction. So, where's my Final Scratch record? The basic system, Final Scratch, is kind of a 3-way system. You have your laptop, which is right here, and that's hooked up to your mixer, any mixer. I'm not going to go into the specifics, but the one interesting thing about Final Scratch is that, unlike a lot of other technologies, you don't need specialized turntables, or I've seen some other things that they put these big things on there, like computer-like chips or something that, track movements and all this stuff that sounds great, but you take it into a smoky club, there's no way it's going to work. So Final Scratch does integrate into a really easy and general setup. So the unit is, you have the computer, you have a small interface box right here, which basically all this is an in and out of your computer. This is bringing the sound in and out of the computer. It's not doing much more than that. Everything else is done in software. And you have your record. And if no one believes me, after I'm done blabbing away, people can come up and check this out and check this record. But it's a regular piece of vinyl. I handle it as well as all my other pieces of vinyl. So, and I'll kind of show you what it does. First of all, here's a really stupid demonstration of what you can do with a record. You know, the basic things you can do with a record and what DJs want to do is queuing up a record, backspinning record, playing it at the wrong speed. I play records at the wrong speed. One of my records, actually, one of my favorite records I ever made, Panic Attack, under the name Plastic Man, sounds much better at 33, but it was recorded at 45. So, but on the label I put play at 33 or 45, so, you know, to each his own. So, this is what you can do to the a regular record. You scan through the record to find the part you want. You know, you turn the record off. All that stuff. Final scratch. Once, I'll explain this first. Let me explain the interface before I demonstrate this. What you have up here is your left and right turntable. And down below you have a searching mechanism to find your music, because of course, now that you're on a computer, you don't have all these records to thumb through. You have to actually search for everything on the computer. And although it's really strange for anyone who's been DJing for a long period of time, once you get into searching for things on the computer, it's much, much easier. You know, I'll do some shameless self-promotion. So if I need one of my tracks, most of my tracks, except for this one right here, is something that reminded me of my track, so I put my name in it just so I could find it very fast. But, well, you know, this is the beauty of this system. You know, if anyone's ever seen any of my records, I have these really stupid little things, min, clicks, bomb. Half the time I can't remember what I wrote and I can't read my own handwriting, and I have little marks about which side to play and all that stuff. I don't have tempos like some DJs though, but that's another thing. One of the cool things about using a computer is you can start to tag all your tracks with certain information, whether it is beat per minute, whether it's musical type, house music. I have things classified as classic, anything with the word classic in it will show up. I have things like classic techno or Detroit classic, you know. So it's a great way of searching for your music. But I'm going to show you more of this in a minute. So once I pick a track, I assign it to my left and right turntable. You can see on the left right now, if you can read it, it says Vitalik, Pawnee, EP, Gigolo. You could put more information than that, but I guess I'm a minimalist, so I didn't put too much. So for all intents and purposes, now the computer thinks your left turntable is this Vitalik track, which is exactly, should be this track. You put your final scratch record on. You take your other one off because it's the way you scratch your records. And put the needle on, and hopefully it works. Now what you're going to see is on the top of the screen, the top of the turntable left, you have a squiggly kind of line at the very, very top. What that is, that's your, if anyone's used audio on any computers before, that's kind of showing the waveform, a graphical representation of how the music looks. And you can see, can everyone see the red line in the very top left-hand corner, top of that? Okay, that's actually showing where you're playing right now. Below, you've got a 30-second window of what's actually playing, so you can kind of see what's happening. Because one of the problems, one of the things that DJs are used to is if you actually look at every record looks different. So when you're playing a record and you look where the needle is, you can actually visibly see dropouts, different frequency changes, and you kind of use that to remember or kind of signify when there's going to be a change, when you're going to mix in. And this is what you can see on the screen here. So this is the computer, you know, playing. You know, hopefully you trust me. But now I can do everything that you would be able to do with a normal record. I can backspin, and everything I do you're going to see change on the computer. I can play at the wrong speed if I want. And of course I can use the pitch, which every good DJ needs, because you got to try and mix these damn things. Final Scratch doesn't do any of the mixing for you, so if anyone wants to buy this to become a good DJ, forget it. You know, it's just gonna maybe save your back. Now the red line at the very top, which is showing you where the needle is, just like any other record. If I scan through the record right now, it will update the point where you're playing and update everything else and play from that point on. And here you can see there's a dropout coming through the wave file. So that's the normal record. Try to find the same parts. And that's the MP3 file or the computer file right now. So they're pretty much, well, they're pretty much identical, you know, except it's coming from the computer. Of course, you can manipulate this any way you want. There's the very beginning. Of course, if I'm really heavy-handed on the record and I actually skip the needle on the record, it's going to skip the file because it's figuring out exactly what's happening from where your needle is. So it doesn't fix a heavy-handed DJ either. But again, it starts to open up all these doors of new potential because, you know, I guess you could use it to play back records like anybody else plays records back. You just play this file linear. But because you're playing now a computer file, a digital file, you have much more potential to start to interact with it beforehand. You can take that file and re-edit it or add special effects that you couldn't do live in the studio. You could reverse it. You know, I always find these tracks when I'm traveling that, you know, this great 2-minute introduction, you know, really good drums, the bass line comes in, and then suddenly there's some terrible female vocal comes in, or any, it doesn't have to be female, but no, I do play some vocal records, but there's a lot of them which I just can't get into. Or there's something, a strange sound comes in, and I used to buy these records and maybe buy 2 copies and try and mix back and forth, and sometimes it's just too small, it was just worthless for me. But, you know, for those records now, I can load those into Final Scratch, I can take that part I really like, double it, triple it, or, you know, rework it in the studio just like I would with one of my own tracks, and load it back into Final Scratch, and I have kind of a, whatever, my own distinct version of that track, that kind of Richie Hawtin edit. I'll give you a kind of a little demonstration, a couple. This was something I used. If I show you now, I won't use it again. Make sure I do something new. At one of the last parties we did, I think it was either the Jack party or the Control party, I really like this loop from this old Prince track, 1999. So this is just a really simple example. I just looped it just so that I could play it. It's like a 5-minute loop, and I was able to bring that in. Everybody who recognized it thought perhaps I was going to play Prince, you know, and kind of created a really kind of weird tension. What the hell is he doing? You know what I mean? And at the same time, I don't have it here, but I also had the vocal samples from the beginning of that saying, don't worry, I won't hurt you, which I thought was kind of funny because the sound system was really punishing everybody that night. And I was playing that back and forth. And again, it's something which, yeah, maybe it would have been possible to put on CD or to put on acetate, but these, you know, these are things which you can do much faster now and really, really interact with nearly instantaneously. This was actually for the Control party, I think, but the other party we had a Jack party, and I always wanted to play Jack Your Body, but I was kind of bored of it. So the Jack party was actually, I was flying back from London, England, the morning of that party, and on the plane, I opened up my Final Scratch system and just decided to take Jack Your Body and cut it up into a whole bunch of different loops, a bunch of different pieces, so that throughout the night I could just bring the the vocal part, Jack Your Body, Jack Your Body, or just bring the bass line in, and not worrying about having to have two copies or anything. Just really kind of plan ahead and have these kind of weird, strange things to play. So, so this one is just actually that's the original. So it's a little bit monotonous by itself, but of course my shows are a little bit monotonous sometimes, but that gave me a way of kind of playing with things. And when you start, again, none of these technologies I think are going to like save the world by themselves, but all together, when you start doing the EQs, doing stuff like that. So that was what kind of started showing me the potential of Final Scratch, just to prove that this is actually the computer going. It's very easy to, I wouldn't do this as I'm playing out in front of a crowd, but to pick a new record, all you have to do is hold your control down and you just press F1 or F6 to assign it to a different turntable. So once it's assigned, this record becomes that record. So I can just kind of show you how fast you can search for records and assign a new record to the turntable. So not only does it allow you to re-edit, do all these crazy things, but it also allows you, if you want to do it, be a master mixer and do all this things really fast, it enables you to speed your kind of movements up. And one of the hardest things of this whole system for me in the beginning was searching for music on this computer. I just felt really strange, just like sitting here typing, and I was really, really fast going through and finding that record, like finding that green label or that scribble that my memory kind of told me was that record I wanted to play. But now that I've been using it for about nearly a year, it's much, much quicker for me. Even if I can't remember a name, I know the next track I want to play is a Mills track. I can go Mills, and I've got it there. This is, where's that thing? The only bad thing is if you forget what it's called. I don't know if it's still in here yet. For some reason, this one is always the one I can't find. I was going to show another example of course, on this record, which everybody knows, and I love this record, but I'm totally sick of this record because every techno DJ in the world plays it at every party. So because everybody plays it, and I know it's kind of in some ways a crowd pleaser, I was like, well, it'd be really cool if I could play that and make it interesting again. So it's in here somewhere, but what I did was take this line. Actually, I can kind of show you with this. mix the record back in, because after a while it would get annoying also. But again, another way of using the effects, the looper, the sampler, final scratch, to further move away from just playing back music the way it was recorded. And you know, to me, that's, you know, I think that's the way it's really going. I really, you know, I enjoy buying new records and hearing, you know, the way producers are making them. You know, when I make music, I want people to enjoy it the way it's been made. But I think we're going to a time now where people are expecting things to change as fast as everything else is changing in our lives. And this is the technology that I'm looking for, really, to, you know, reevaluate, to deconstruct and put back together music in front of people. You know, that's what I did 10 or 15 years ago with just 2 turntables and an EQ. And that blew people's heads off then. It was totally different. It was what we were all doing in Detroit, what other people weren't doing elsewhere. And as more people took that on, you know, it was time to find further technologies to do that again. To always, you know, I guess, try and be one step ahead of the crowd, and to give them something again which is indescribable, something which is special for that moment, and something which is unique. And you can't do that by just playing 2 records back anymore. I don't think you could do. Some people think you can. I don't think you could do that 10 years ago. So, you know, it really is, you know, that's also why I think, why I'm involved in electronic music. When I heard Derek's records, when I heard those early things, it was unlike I ever heard it before, and it was unlike anything I'd heard before. And I think whether you're making music or whether you're DJing or performing, if it's electronic based, then it's technology based, and technology is changing every day, pushing forward, mutating, and I think that's what we really have to do with our music. And I think whether or not the crowd knows it, that's what they want. That's, you know, everyone remembers that first night of hearing a new track or seeing a DJ for the first time, or whether it was going to the Banco building, or whether it was going to one of our parties, or going to see, you know, Jeff Mills play a couple of weeks ago with Derek. You know, it's those first experiences, those things where you just can't really describe it. Once you can describe it, it's boring. You don't really want to relive that again. Well, I don't. So I'm out there, as well as others are out there, trying to use all this technology to kind of push forward and, you know, make it different once again. After, if anyone wants to come up and play with Final Scratch and just kind of really see that it is working and it's not a big hoax, they can. I'm just going to do a little bit more, and then we can have some, I guess, some questions and answers. But this is kind of what myself and some other people are working on now, or looking at using for our performances. Let me just stop this thing. You know, when I created DE9 Closer to the Edit, which was only it's less than a year ago, one of the big things for me to do was to take my live performance, what I was using in front of everybody, and all the knowledge that I had in my studio, all the computer components I had, from Pro Tools to different you know, everything possible, to try and create an album which wasn't me mixing live. If anyone thinks I did that live, I didn't. Forget it. You know, I would need about 20 hands. Well, maybe not now, but you know, I lost my train of thought. Sorry. But that album was trying to capture where I thought DJing or performance was going, and like I said before, that was taking small components from these records, mixing them together, and creating something completely new. Not just playing things on top of each other, re-evaluating everything as closely, as tightly as possible. And you know, last May when I recorded it, it took, I think I worked on the project for about 6 weeks. The project consisted of about 600 loops which I had to cut up and optimize and all this. I ended up using about 300 on the actual record, but it was very time intensive, about 6 weeks of cutting, splicing, sitting in front of a computer screen, using Final Scratch to test some things, playing records back and forth, and you know, a hell of a lot of studio trickery to get to that point. And towards the end of last year, around August or September, a company in Berlin started to talk about this program called Live, which they were going to release. And it's not a completely revolutionary program in the way that it's more like a collection of other ideas and programs that have been out there, but it's executed quite efficiently. It's a number of things that have come together. And this program is something that, like I said, other people and myself are looking at using for our performances, because it gets down to kind of the level of where Dex Effects or D9 CE, how close to the edit was, taking, throwing away the composition as it was by the artist, letting someone reevaluate those ideas and rework it completely live and spontaneous. So it is nearly possible to create something like Dex Effects completely, spontaneously or live in front of people. This isn't going to be perfect, but a little bit of a kind of idea of what I'm talking about. This is, if anyone has a CD, track 28 from D9 CE. It's the wrong one. That's a certain section. I won't lie. This is one of the simplest sections of the D9 CD to kind of demonstrate. Just makes it a little bit easier for me without having so many different loops going. But that was made from a basic about 3 components, 3 different records. Of course, you've got this that line, and then you've got the drums. Those are 2 different records. If anyone knows this little organy line, it's quite funny because it's comes from a complete ambient record from Cologne, and the guy who made it thought it was pretty funny that I made his ambient record into a dance track. So, but that was created all in the studio, and there was really no way to do that a year ago live, and now we have this program called Live, and what I have here is you can see right here it says Philip Cam, which is the ambient track. And then you have these different mosaic 28 tracks. And what these are different loops. These are actually the loops that came from DE9, from the recording of the album. There's nothing different to them. And now what I'm able to do is play these back on top of each other, cutting, kind of splicing, bringing different components in and out, completely live and completely spontaneous, and redoing what I did in the studio a year or so ago for the D9 record. And of course, now that I can do this, it's kind of giving me the inklings of what comes beyond Final Scratch. I can do this in Final Scratch, but I have to think about it before. I want to take this Prince loop. I want to take this Jack Your Body loop, and do this. I need 5 minutes of it, or I need this, and then it should do this, and then it should do this. So, yes, I can do kind of spontaneous work, but it takes a lot of kind of forethought. Now I'm down to this. I can really move away from basic structure of the tracks and really start playing with things. So I'll just do a little demo here. So there we have the basic track again. This is really like decks and effects in a box. Once I get the exact way I'm going to try and bring this into my performances, because I've got effects in here, I've got the samples, I've got the loops. So basically, in theory, throw this away, throw this away, throw this away, throw this away. And although I shouldn't say this, probably throw this away too, hopefully. And much easier with a mouse too, usually, but I ran out of room up here. So those are all loops from DE9, except for this last one. And you can see, even with just like my finger here, it's starting to get really easy to spontaneously remix, re-edit, re-evaluate all this music. The only thing I have to do beforehand is get those loops ready. But there's no thinking about, how I'm going to structure it, Forget how the artist structured it, even forget how I want to structure it right now. Now I can structure it again right in front of the people. And that is another big key for the whole Dex FX 909 performance. It's why I also use the 909. It was spontaneous. It's, how can you try to create something memorable or something special for the crowd in front of you when perhaps you've never played for them before? Every time I play in Detroit, yeah, it's like playing at home, but it's always a slightly different crowd. The sound system's different. The location's different. And, you need to be able to spontaneously react to all those stimuli to create something really unique. And, that's what all this stuff has done to me, done for me. And, this is what I find, really exciting right now, because I can really, I think, take a big step ahead of what I've done and have much more potential than ever before. And the more potential I have to kind of play with sound, with loops, with music, the more deconstruction I can do, I think the more powerful the moment I can create for the people who are there. So I think that's about it. That kind of gives you, hopefully, a little bit of an idea of what I do, why I do it, what some of you have seen me, what you've seen me do at Jack or Control or any of the parties that perhaps you've been to, and perhaps what you're going to hear, at some of the next ones. Hopefully I wasn't too boring. I think we're going to open it for some questions. And anyone asks anything stupid, I'm just going to ignore you. So please try and ask something intelligent. If there's, again, you can come and check Final Scratch out after. If you have a question related to what I've done in the past or anything, to my career, even if I haven't covered it, feel free to ask. I'm all up for any questions. Who's going to be the first one to start it? Oh, finally, good. Now it's like Oprah. But Oprah doesn't have to wear this stupid thing.
Hi, Rich. I'm Sam from Ghostly. My question is concerning other reactions. The press has obviously been favorable to Final Scratch and what you've done, but your heroes in particular.
Actually, I was gonna touch on that, without saying any kind of names. But the thing that I find really amusing is, when I started out, a lot of the traditional musicians, I guess people who are into more like rock or that type of thing, were saying, oh, you guys aren't doing music, this electronic stuff, anyone who can use computers, DJs aren't musicians, blah, blah, blah. And I'm finding a similar backlash with some of, the most established electronic DJs and artists with Final Scratch, and even things like Live and stuff like that. A lot of them are, well, I like the turntables, this is how it's done, this is DJing, this is, what the people know, and this is what I should do. And, I think we're at a really interesting point right now, because I think there is going to be a shakeup, because it takes a whole new way of thinking to perform and to go where we're going to go. Sure, there's going to be room for playback DJs, or, like there's always been people, well, maybe not actually, but just playing back music to crowds who want unchallenging experiences or unchallenging music. But for the most part, I think the people who are really, really into electronic music want more from the performance, want more from the artists, and I think hopefully a lot of the people will step up to the plate and start to experiment with this technology. 2 turntables is, it's ridiculous. It's so archaic.
Thanks. Thank you.
Did I answer what you're talking? Okay.
It's more of a technical question, but Live, is it possible to interface with Live through external control devices, or is it something? Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually really, really, the guys that are doing this are really smart. You just, what you can do, you can assign things to keys. I can just go click on any of these things here and assign them to the keyboard so I can have every loop assigned and just kick things in and out. You can also go there and edit the MIDI map, and all the sliders, faders, and everything can be put to any type of controller, whether it's like a MIDI to like a beam controller or just a regular fader. And for anyone who's seen this program, it's actually by. I'm only plugging this company just because I think they're the coolest damn company in the world right now. It's Ableton, ableton.com, if people want to check it out. But I'm only touching on the surface. Like, I basically just showed you how to play a couple of loops back. There is so much more potential in this program to like really start to even further deconstruct those loops and really, really fuck with them. So it's, you're not just going to see or hear me or someone else with this laptop up there just playing a couple of loops back. It's going to go way beyond that. You can't ask a question.
I was originally gonna ask you how you describe the minus sound, but you seem to have talked about that earlier, about how you just want to keep things fresh and new.
Yeah, I think the minus sound, of course it's a deconstructive sound. I think it's really about using this technology to get really down to the basic fundamentals of sound. I'm really excited when I listen to things that just have a great balance to what is necessary and what is unnecessary. I think when I strike that, it's when I've created something really interesting, both in DJing or like an album like Consumed or something, or even like a Dale Ethereum release, or we released some records last year under the name Needlefleur, which are really, really minimal, just some sub bass and a couple of blips and blops, but it was perfect. If you added anything else, it would have been cluttered and made no sense. And if you took anything out, it would have been like, well, something's missing. So that's kind of the balance we're trying to strike in what we're releasing and what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. When you come up with a new sound, when you had the acid sound and the sort of hard techno sound, and now it seems to be more of like a soulful, groovy type sound, I've noticed with the latest album.
Maybe I'm getting old.
So I was wondering if the people on your label ever come into conflicts with that.
Not really. I think I would much rather my artists or the artists on the label like challenge us and challenge the audience. Of course, you don't probably always see eye to eye with everything. Some people are going to take turns which you could just aren't right, and perhaps they're better suited somewhere else. But like take for instance, 1997. On +8, we had 2 amazing albums. Clark, was it 97? Hopefully. That was the Kooky Scientist album, which was by Fred Gianelli, who played at Motor on the Weekend, which was really funky and musical and very reminiscent of what's happening today in a lot of techno, really kind of soulful and groovy. And it was just a really fun, really cool album. And then, Speedy J came up to us and delivered us this album, which was like, futuristic noise. It was unbelievable. It didn't do so well for us. People couldn't understand it. They were like, oh, where did the good old Speedy go? But it was, for me, I love all of his music he's ever done for us and for other people, but it was probably my favorite album because it challenged everyone and everyone at the label. We were just like, we didn't expect it. And that's exciting. That's, when I talk about seeing Derek back in the day and those guys, but, when Derek or any of these guys dropped records for the first time, like some of his tracks or future acid tracks or just you're just like, wow, what the hell is going on? What is this record? What is this sound? And that's what I've always tried to capture, whether it's a weird thing like the Concept series or Consume, but just something which is like, well, this is different. There's a new angle here. And those are the artists I want to work with, and those are the records I want to buy, And it's also, even if you have a record like that, if it becomes a record that everyone's playing, then I want to be able to put a new twist on it so someone hears my record or Jeff Mills' record again differently when they hear me play. And it's like, oh, something's different, something's strange, something's not right. And when they're saying something's not right, it's probably I'm probably doing something right. Yeah.
I have a question. You talked about how in electronic music, it's constantly changing, constantly progressing. Where do you see technology enhancing live performance in the future, and where would you like it to go?
Well, I think something like live is very interesting. I just the way I hope that we're going to be able to more spontaneously interact with music. It's now I'm taking loops and samples from records, but I can't see why we couldn't, for instance, be downloading or grabbing information or sounds or video images from the net in real time, or just information and translating it to something during the performance. This goes from a DJ to a musician to an artist to anything. Just really, I really see myself as kind of reinterpreting information with technology, and most of that information now is dance floor based. But hopefully, as we go further into the future, there'll be newer interfaces, newer software programs or hardware devices which kind of heighten that way of interacting with information.
Hey, Rich. I'm curious about something.
I'm scared.
No, don't be. Well, I hope you shouldn't be scared. I know that you have records that are really special to you, favorites that you save out for special moments or whatever. I'm wondering, as you start breaking things down into smaller and smaller pieces, do you find yourself losing that connection to an entire piece when you're only looking for just a tiny little proportion to use?
You know, I think it's always trying to find there's always something in a record that is part of that special quality. Maybe it's a hi-hat pattern, or it's a string line, or a certain loop of ideas. And I'm trying to find those parts in those records. You know, I love listening to, you know, classic records and playing them out, you know, but I always get that kind of like, you get that warm feeling, oh, I remember the Banco building and stuff like that. And then after the warm feeling goes away, maybe after 30 seconds or a minute, I'm like, well, that was then. Fuck that shit. You know, I don't, that was great then, but how can I play this record so I get that feeling, but updated now? Can I do it with that record, or do I just throw that record away and find a new record? Do I take, you know, the little clip it from Jack Your Body and loop the bass line differently so everyone hears it and they're like, is this Jack Your Body? Well, maybe it's not, but it gives them that kind of feeling of what Jack Your Body did the first time you heard it. So I don't think it's really hard to do. It doesn't work all the time, and there's probably records where maybe I won't be able to do that too, but that's kind of the challenge, you know, trying to, you know, we have probably similar records that we, you know, kind of take us back. And I'm much more interested in making a moment for people now, how we feel about 8 years ago or 2 years ago. You know what I mean? Making that moment that in a couple of years they're going to look back at. But hopefully they won't just look back and reminisce and get old like so many people. They'll look back, think about it, and say, well, I want to find another experience like that. I want to hear a new record like that, a new sound. And out of all the musics and genres I've ever heard, electronic music seems to, it's not always perfect, but it seems to have the most potential, because of its tie with technology, to always, you know, reevaluate itself and give you another experience.
Hi, I'm curious about how you feel about the increasing number of musicians who play, say, acoustic instruments or playing with other groups of musicians live, and not only incorporating electronics into the music that they're making, but actually incorporating the styles of music that strictly electronic artists have been performing up until this point.
I was never, there's some acoustic stuff I like. I was never a big fan of it, but anything, as long as at the heart of it, there's some type of progression, and I think that is apparent when you hear a piece. If that was kind of the intention, that there is this kind of forward-thinkingness to the way they either produced it or the way they integrated things, you know. And at the same time, there's a lot of other musicians trying to integrate electronics with other types of forms of music to just really kind of relive what's happened before. But as long as they have that kind of perspective, let's take these techno ideas that are kind of futuristic or whatever, and take these ideas and try and make something which hasn't existed before. That's, you know, that's I guess the common goal, and you see, you know, finally a lot of musicians from all different types of genres using technology now and filtering things, or sending guitars for this, or vocals and resampling vocals, and you're starting to hear really contemporary music, which is very strange, and I think that's, you know, a positive thing. So.
So something that I'm pretty interested in is the way that you create a sense of environment at your parties, and you kind of talked about that in terms of music, but I'm also interested in, you know, sort of the history of how you developed the way that you have the room set up, or the way that you know, who you interact with in terms of doing that, and how that's developed over time, and how important that is to you.
It's a big one. It's very important. I think, you know, I guess what I've been talking about tonight really is about, you know, music, but again, marking a specific moment in time, creating something that makes an impression on someone. And I noticed very early on that, you know, to do something, to make an impression on someone, there's many other forces acting on them than just music. You know, I remember that back to the time when, you know, Derek was playing, in fact, to Derek today, but at the Music Institute, and that was just like a dark room and a huge sound system. And I remember remembering the kind of the emphasis on the sound there, and because many other clubs were, the DJs were playing, but this sound was just like enveloping, and this dark room was enveloping. It was the same as at the Banco building when we did our first parties, Hard and Harder and all those things. Back then, we started just doing the black plastic to get rid of all external stimuli, so people could only focus on the music or focus within, and really kind of take a step away from themselves. And through doing that and kind of experimenting, it just, became more apparent how important the environment was to the overall experience. So, we've done lots of different experiments over the years, like at the Consume party in Pontiac. We had a quadraphonic system, which, I'd love to do again, but it was a technical nightmare. But we're hoping to do it again. But that, further playing with space and dimensions of the room to really interact with the people in that space. Because I talk to other DJs and stuff, and everyone, I guess, is sometimes nearly too overwhelmed or too focused on the music. And it's wouldn't be here without the music. It is definitely the most important component. But we've always, myself and the guys at Minus, my crew, we've always taken into all the other consideration, the heat of the room, the intensity of the lights, how the absence of light or how that quick burst of white light is going to work together with that record I'm playing. How annoying and intense smoke can become when you could hardly, you can hardly see anything or hardly breathe, and what a rush it is when you come out of that, both musically and both emotionally, Nelly. So it's hard to go into all that, but it's definitely something which interests me just as much as the music I'm doing. And I think the last year or so, the parties we've been doing around here have been, those ideas have been there, but we're, I think, trying to take a step even further into that now. But there's so many different things you can do, so many new technologies for the environment. But I don't really want to do parties for $80 just to pull off the ideas I have right now. So we're trying to, Clark's working on it. Hopefully we'll pull it off. And I think the next thing we're looking at doing is trying to get back to some quad setups on the musical level, and then really delve back into the environments. Because there's a lot of artists, kind of artist-based artists, not musicians, who are doing environments and things like that, but there's not so many people around the world that really take this view on the whole thing. We've had people come to our parties to play, or other DJs, and see, and they're like, well, you guys are crazy. But when you see all those things come together, it's not just about, the effects work, the sampler works, Final Scratch work, this works, but this is interesting with live. As I start to go more on a computer-based things, when I have things like MIDI and all these things working in my favor, the idea of hooking that up to lighting rigs and all that starts to get really interesting. Because the thing we've been working on the last two parties, Jack and Control, and the whole idea with the Control idea is taking that to the next step further and giving one person in the room full control over the whole environment, which kind of I've had in the past, but not kind of beforehand, not during. And now I'm starting to get that during, and not just with fog machines, but just with like full lighting rigs and controls right next to me. So if I'm dropping a fader on audio, I can bring up a fader on the lights, or vice versa. So that's kind of what we're exploring. And that's where things get powerful. You've got to have, we don't just listen, we see, we smell, we feel. So see what happens.
This in your last answer, but the question I have is that over some of the computer-based shows that I've seen, I kind of felt this disconnection with the artist. I kind of felt that even with the great music that I was hearing over the sound system, it almost as if that could have been recorded. Yeah. And the skeptical side, I couldn't stop thinking that the artist up there was simply playing solitaire.
Well,
instead of actually playing the music.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that is a challenge that you have to get over, or how do you see as DJ performances continue to move into the computer-based area? Do you see that as a challenge, and how do you plan on attacking that?
I think it is definitely a challenge. I've seen so many laptop technicians who sound amazing, but it's like Snorville. It's just, like, it's strange for me to say that actually, because when I go to a club and dance, I usually just close my eyes and try and take in the music. But I know there is a certain thing about the performance of the person creating. And I don't know if it's just watching someone and they're not doing much and it's boring that way, but I think there is that underlying fear or knowledge that perhaps they're not doing as much as they pretend they're doing. I've seen so many, and I think I have a bit of an interesting outlook on it, because when I did my live shows in 93, 94, 95 with Plastic Man, part of the reasons I stopped doing them in a way and went to Dex FX 909 was that I was carrying all that equipment. The reason I was to give myself the potential of interacting with the crowd when I did a live show. So there was loops playing, yeah, there was pre-planning, but the sequencing, the structure, the arrangement could really change from night to night. When I played Glastonbury in 95, or when I played Toronto or Spastic here, the same tracks were played, but in completely different orders, different effects. It was a little bit organic. And, it's going to be really interesting to see how many people follow that path with the laptops, as DJing goes into this thing, because some people will probably pre-plan too much. I think that's the problem with computer technology. You can pre-plan, you can perfect, and you can isolate and just sit there forever, and everything does become too perfect. And I think what we were just talking about with the parties, I think it's going to go beyond just playing music. I really see I see myself now and definitely in the future really trying to take the parties that we do here on the road throughout the world, because it is more than just the music and more than just a party. It's an experience. And perhaps I won't be playing records, and perhaps I'll be behind 2 or 3 laptops, but I'll be controlling lights and the intensity of different objects, the sound, the level of the sound, but all as fluidly as possible and as spontaneous as possible. Because again, if I want to create something which is memorable and something unique, I can't just play the same sequence every night, even though I could do this exact same sequence, the exact same show at Control, and then take it to London, England, and do the same records in the same order. No one's going to really know. A couple more people now than 10 years ago because there's the internet, but it can be done, and I think a lot of people are taking advantage of that. But you have my permission to kick me in the head if I fall into that trap. I don't think I will.
Hello. You mentioned something about taking advantage of DJs. There's like this mainstream DJ that's respinning music that you mentioned and is collecting a large amount of money.
What are you talking about, Paul Oakenfold?
Well, there's...
I didn't say that. I think so. Just picked something radio signals out.
I see like this large division happening between people who are interested in new music and creating, and some of the various names that you probably know. How do you think that's affecting all of us?
As long as we don't get jaded about it, then I don't think it really affects us. I know some other producers and DJs kind of in similar to myself, my peers, who get really upset when they hear people are coming in who've only been doing it for 5 years or are playing more commercial and getting all this money, and they just go in, they play the same records, they're not really mixing. But it's not what I do. It's not what we're all here for, I don't think. That's not what we're involved in. So, this music is going to get more popular. It will further reach the masses, and as it does that, we'll be, slowly moving, well, hopefully not slowly, at an ever-increasing speed, moving along, hopefully innovating and doing different things. That's what's, there's nearly like a self-destruction mechanism built into what we're doing, because every time, if you want to make something popular and you want to take it to a commercial level, you need to kind of like take it, define it, explain it, and then give it to everyone so they can take it for mass consumption. But every time you do that to electronic music, by the time you take it to the people, we're over here. So as long as we don't mind, some people are going to take that, give it to the mass population and make a hell of a lot of money on it, then so be it. I hope that, I always thought like other artists, like, even like Moby or Paul Oakenfold, Sasha Digweed, all these people, not saying anything bad about them, Chemical Brothers, these are all people who are related and have come up through what I do, what Derek does, all these people, but they're bringing a lot of new people into this, and I hope that some of those people will filter down through to people like myself and Carl Craig, and if they find us, some people are going to really like what we do, some people aren't, and some people are going to say what we do is commercial, and they're going to go down further and then find people like, whatever, Basic Channel and Pole, and then go down even further and find the kid in the basement twiddling knobs and playing with the Max MSP and making really crazy stuff, because my stuff is a little bit experimental, but not compared to other people. I'm commercial, so it's all in the perspective, right? But if Paul Oakenfold gave us one of his fees, we could probably do a really cool party.
Yeah, I was, this is weird. Hearing myself and on the screen, that's very nice. I was wondering, the Detroit scene of like the late 80s and early 90s kind of gave the city a lot of really good music, and it seemed to like spoil or jade a lot of people later in the 90s, and kind of give people just this like almost fuck you ethos, and like this really hardcore type edge. And the scene itself has always just seemed like, a couple thousand people at a party, where like you go to bigger cities like San Francisco or to Europe, and you go to like 5,000, 10,000 people parties, and with like the explosion with like Demph, which seems to be the only thing in Detroit that's comparable. Do you see anything like that happening in Detroit as far as the size, or do you see just people just wanting to do their own thing? Or?
And Detroit's always been a strange place for that. It's I think part of the reason Detroit's so special, part of the reason Derek and those guys created the sound they created back in the day, was that Detroit was never a destination. You didn't come from Europe to go to Detroit. You went to Chicago and New York, maybe LA and to the West Coast. And it's just a bit off the beaten track. So that enabled a whole generation of DJs and producers to be inspired by things that were going on outside of here, but at the end of the day, just kind of lock themselves away and change and really innovate and do something different. And I think because of that special value here, in some ways, people are much more interested in doing these new ideas and moving forward and trying new techniques, and nearly it alienates a group of people that could possibly take this to the next level here. But I don't know, it's kind of nice. Maybe it's selfish for me to say, because I go all these other places and see these parties at 5, 10, 15, 20,000 people. But it's nice coming back here and doing some smaller parties and seeing the intensity of the parties here and of the people who are really into it. Yeah, there's maybe not as many opportunities. Maybe it's harder, but I think in a lot of ways it's more special. I played, I don't know, maybe 150 gigs last year, something ridiculous. Anything from 200 people to, I don't know, 25, 30,000 people in front of me. And I think, two of the best parties, if not the best, were the two here, because of the history I've had here, because of my friends there, but also just because there's something special here, and people, they go, they just gig.
So a major theme in what you've been discussing has been the idea of progression. Does that ever come into conflict with expression? And how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, so it does, but I think when it comes, there is moments in my career where I've tried to balance it so that I can have fun at the same time as trying to be progressive and different and come up with albums like Consumed or Concept or whatever, or even the parties we do, doing these environments at the same time. We do our small parties like in bars sometimes, or when I was involved with 13 Below in Windsor, would have small parties there, and when I had more time in the studio, I'd also come back with kind of like a fun EP, something a little bit more light-hearted, like Robot Man or Do the Do, which was just a fun track. You know what I mean? So I want to enjoy what I'm doing and kind of have that balance, so that you can, because if it gets too serious for me, I think not only am I going to lose focus on being progressive, but I'm going to just lose focus on the enjoyment of it all too. So it does get hard sometimes, and sometimes when things just aren't working, I take time off. I'm not in a big rush to release. Clark wants me to release more. The label in England wants me to release more, but for after the music album on Plastic Man, I took a long time off from Plastic Man. It wasn't really until and even a lot of the Artifacts material was done, which I didn't think was that progressive, but I only thought that was able to be released after I released Consumed and kind of marked my new territory. And then it was like, well, for all those who don't really get where I'm going, here's something, a little bit of a blast from the past, a little bit updated, but, kind of, again, balance those two things. Josh, what are you going to ask me? I don't know.
For anybody new, I guess getting into electronic music, would you recommend them listening to or experience?
What would I recommend them listening to?
Or listening to, experiencing, I guess anything in general.
Wow, that's a hard one. Well, the new Minus compilation that's coming out in 2 weeks. No, just kidding. We don't have a Minus compilation. Yeah, that's so hard because there's so much good music coming out right now. There's so many different facets of electronic music, so much history there. I guess I would say, I'd pawn this off to a friend. I'd say go to Record Time and talk to Derek Plaseco and see if there's some kind of good compilation or something that gives you an overview of things, to try and see kind of where your tastes lie, because there is so much development in electronic music. I think it's easy for some people to get overwhelmed and buy something and not really be into it. Oh, I'm not really into electronic music. I just can't understand it. But you really do need the right way in to slowly kind of learn the alphabet of what we're doing, because it's really like that. You can't just jump in and start, reading a language that you've never read before. So I'm kind of not really giving you an answer, but it's a hard one. So, but if you want to, maybe another good way is to go see a really good DJ who's playing in this area, who has an open mind and is playing a kind of a wide variety of music. In that way, not just going to see someone who's going to play a 2-hour set of house or a 2-hour set of techno, going to see, Derek play or myself play, or someone like Laurent Garnier play, or Sven Veit, or even like, someone like Carl Cox, as long as they're doing, these people are doing long sets, so you get a kind of a scope, and maybe during that night you'll be like, well, I kind of like this and this section, and then maybe you can explain it to someone at a record store or something, or you can search for it on the internet. So, but it's overwhelming, and now I didn't give you an answer, so.
Yeah, I just want to, most of what we've talked about in the past hour has been, even the title of the program was Deconstructing Music, taking things that already existed and, tweaking them, flipping them, pulling the rug out from them. Where do you see the potential with this new technology, like the laptop-based stuff, getting back into actually constructing music that absolutely has never existed before, as opposed to just altering music that in some way has existed?
Well, I think we're at a little bit of a strange point right now, because I find a lot of the technologies are still, that are being created for music making, are still kind of based upon recreating in a computer what we've done in the past. You know, here's a virtual synth that sounds like a 909, well, that's a drum machine, but a 303 or something like this. But I think, you know, slowly, as people are using more and more computer-based things, people are starting to put different kind of equations and different angles on how to create music or how to create art generally. I know there's a new synthesizer coming out from Germany, and it uses some type of binary reasoning or something I was reading about. I still don't understand what it does, but it sounds really, really interesting. But I think, you know, it's as technology progresses, as computers, you know, become faster, as all this, you know, the typical kind of thing with computers and storage and memory becomes cheaper and faster and smaller, it's just going to give programmers and people more potential to really play with things and to hopefully come up with something which is completely new. You know, and also on a creative level, the use of laptops and smaller pieces of technology is enabling many of us to work in different environments, in different locations, and maybe more often than we have done in the past 5 or 10 years. You know, I'm starting to be able to write, or at least kind of do sketch work of ideas, you know, away from my studio now, which I haven't really been able to do in the last 10 years. So maybe now I will have more potential to work on music a greater number of hours every year, and perhaps that will get me to the next destination a little bit faster, wherever that is. So I think it's a bit of everything. Is that it? I was starting to enjoy
Last
myself.
chance.
If no one has put their hand up,
Sure,
we're
no
done.
more questions? This is your last chance.
If I'm going to hang around for a while, so if anyone wants to kind of see Final Scratch or doesn't believe it or whatever, they can kind of come up here. Try not to all come at once, and if anyone wants to, and just be careful with it. Well, it's pretty robust, but thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
And